The day had been long for Arif, a poor farmer living in the outskirts of a quiet village. His hands were rough from years of working the soil, his back bent from the weight of survival. The crops hadn't done well this season, and the money lenders were beginning to circle again. His small patch of land barely gave enough to feed his family, and the thought of the upcoming loan payment kept pressing on his mind like a stone too heavy to lift. The rain had started lightly in the evening, turning the dirt paths to slippery mud, but Arif didn't stop. He was walking home after selling some leftover vegetables in the nearby town, his old shawl soaked from the rain. His slippers squished in the puddles, but he didn't care. His heart was heavy, his thoughts far away. As he neared the bend that connected the main road to his village, something caught his eye. In the distance, down a small slope, lights were flickering weakly. At first, he thought it was a motorcycle's headlight left on, but as he moved closer, his heart started to race. There, turned upside down in the muddy field, was a car. The wheels were still slowly spinning, and smoke was rising from the engine. Arif's tiredness vanished. Without a second thought, he slipped down the slope, his feet sinking into the wet soil. The air was filled with the sharp smell of oil and metal. As he reached the car, he saw movement. Inside the overturned vehicle, a woman was cradling two children close to her. She was clearly injured, her forehead bleeding, her face pale from fear and shock. Arif's voice shook as he asked if she could hear him. The woman nodded weakly, her arms still wrapped tightly around the children, both of whom looked no older than 7. One of them was crying softly while the other was too scared to even speak. The door was jammed, the car's frame bent badly. The smoke from the engine was thick now, making it hard to breathe. Arif looked around, but there was no one else on this road. He knew waiting for help could be fatal. So he pushed harder against the door, his fingers slipping, his arms aching. After what felt like forever, the door gave way with a loud creak. Rainwater rushed in as he opened it, mixing with the blood and tears inside. One by one, he helped the children out first. The little girl had a bruise on her cheek, and the boy's clothes were soaked and muddy. Still, he moved quickly, shielding them from the sharp edges of broken glass as he laid them gently under a nearby tree. The woman tried to stand, but her leg was hurt, and she collapsed with a cry. Arif didn't ask questions. He went back, lifted her carefully, and brought her to her children. She held them close, her hands trembling, her lips murmuring silent prayers. The rain kept falling, soft but steady. Arif removed his shawl and covered the children, then tore a piece of cloth from his kurta to press against the woman's wound. There was no mobile signal in this part of the road, and Arif didn't have a phone anyway. So he did the only thing he could think of while he stayed with them. He sat by their side, watching the road for headlights, listening for any sound of a vehicle. The minutes passed slowly. The woman spoke little, only enough to say her name was Sanaa, and the children were Sarah and Bilal. They had been coming back from visiting her parents when the car slipped off the wet road. Her husband had died a year ago, and she had no one else but her kids. Arif listened quietly, the pain in her voice heavy like the clouds above. Finally, after what seemed like hours, a truck passed. Arif ran up the slope, waving his arms, yelling for help. The driver stopped and called for emergency services. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics quickly tended to the family, wrapping them in blankets, checking their injuries. They thanked Arif repeatedly, but he simply nodded, standing back quietly as they worked. He didn't wait for praise. He didn't even wait for a lift back home. Once the ambulance drove off into the rainy night, he turned around and walked back toward his village, his clothes soaked, his feet muddy, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. Little did he know, this one act of kindness would soon change everything, not just for Sanaa and her children, but for Arif himself, and the entire village that barely knew his name. The morning after the rescue, news of the incident began to spread faster than anyone expected. The local health workers and emergency team who had arrived at the scene spoke of a farmer who had disappeared into the night without leaving his name, his face soaked from rain, his hands cut from broken glass. They said he had saved the lives of a woman and her 2 children, lifting them from a wrecked car moments before it could have caught fire. It didn't take long before someone recognized the description. Within hours, people in the nearby villages were talking about Arif, the poor farmer who had quietly returned home after risking his life. He hadn't even told his wife or children what had happened. He had simply entered the house late at night, changed into dry clothes, and gone to sleep without a word. When Sanaa, the injured mother, woke up in the hospital with her children safe beside her, she couldn't stop asking about the man who had saved them. She kept repeating his name, Arif, holding on to the memory of his face and the warmth in his eyes. Local reporters soon picked up the story. It was rare, they said, to find such heroism from someone with so little. When a journalist finally located Arif in his small village, he was out in the fields, planting seeds with a limp in his leg and dirt caked beneath his fingernails. He didn't understand why they were there. He didn't think what he did was news. Anyone would have done the same, he told them, trying to avoid the camera. But they insisted. They asked him to tell his story, and though he was hesitant at first, he eventually agreed. It was the way they looked at him, with respect, almost awe, that made him pause and realize this might be something bigger than he thought. The interview aired on a regional TV channel. Within days, it went viral on social media. People across the country saw the tired face of a farmer who had nothing, yet gave everything he had in a single, life-saving moment. Donations started pouring in from strangers, small amounts from people who said they were touched by his bravery. Some offered to repair his broken roof, others sent clothes, supplies, and letters of gratitude. More surprising than the public response was the letter Arif received from the district commissioner. It was an invitation to a civic awards ceremony in the nearby city. They wanted to honor him for his bravery. At first, Arif didn't want to go. He said he had fields to plow, debts to manage, and animals to feed. But his wife, who had watched him struggle every day to provide, gently insisted. For once, she said, let people see who you really are. When Arif arrived at the ceremony, dressed in clean but simple clothes, the entire audience stood to applaud him. It was a sight he had never imagined. A man who had spent his life ignored now standing under bright lights with people cheering his name. Sanaa and her children were there too. They came forward and hugged him tightly. Sanaa could barely speak as she handed him a small hand-drawn card made by her children. It simply said, "Thank you for saving our lives." Tears filled Arif's eyes. He didn't know how to respond, so he just placed his hand on the boy's head and smiled. The commissioner presented him with a bravery medal and an envelope containing a financial award. Arif had never held that much money in his hands before. He didn't know what to say, except thank you. That night, when he returned to his village, neighbors came out of their homes to greet him. These were people who had once overlooked him. Some even mocked him for being poor. Now they spoke his name with admiration, calling him Hero Arif. But the biggest change wasn't the money or the attention. It was the way his children looked at him. His son, who had once dreamed of leaving the farm to find work in the city, now walked beside him with pride. His daughter started telling her friends that her father was a hero. For the first time, Arif began to believe that maybe his life meant something more than just survival. With the donations and the award, he paid off part of his debt and bought proper roofing materials for his small house. A group of volunteers came from the city to help him fix his barn and install a water pump that would save him hours of work each day. Sanaa visited often with her children. They brought food, books, and toys for Arif's family. A quiet bond formed between them, not of charity, but of shared respect and deep gratitude. As the story continued to spread, local NGOs and aid groups began reaching out to Arif, asking him to speak to students and farmers about kindness, courage, and responsibility. At first, he was uncomfortable in front of crowds. He didn't know big words or how to give speeches. But when he spoke, people listened. Because he spoke from the heart. He talked about fear and how it almost stopped him that night. He talked about pain, how his back still ached, how he thought he couldn't lift another body out of the car, but did. And he talked about choice, that every day gives us a chance to do something right, no matter how small we are. Somewhere along the way, Arif the farmer became Arif the inspiration. His life didn't become perfect. The farm still struggled in bad weather, and money was always tight. But he walked taller, with a quiet strength that others felt when they were near him. People who had once laughed at his torn shoes now offered him rides to the city. His children started performing better in school, motivated by the respect their father now earned. Even the local government, moved by the national attention, began taking an interest in rural development. A new road was planned near Arif's village, and the community center that had been closed for years was reopened. But despite all the changes, Arif remained the same man. He still woke up before dawn, still fed his animals before eating himself, still fixed broken fences with his bare hands. He never sought fame or reward. He said all he wanted was to work his land in peace and raise his family with honesty. He often sat under the neem tree by his field, thinking about that rainy night and the faces he pulled from the car. He never forgot the fear in the mother's eyes or the little girl's silence. He carried that night with him like a seed planted deep in his heart. A reminder that even in darkness, a single act of courage can become a light for many. Months passed, and Arif's life quietly settled into a rhythm he had never known before. A rhythm where he still struggled like any farmer, but with dignity and with the respect of people near and far. The seasons turned, and the earth remained the same, but Arif's heart had changed. He often found himself lost in thought while working his fields, remembering the faces of the children he had saved, the fear that night, the warmth of their mother's gratitude. His own children were doing better in school now. His son talked of becoming an agricultural expert to help farmers like his father, while his daughter dreamed of becoming a teacher. Their futures, once dim and uncertain, now seemed lit with real hope. Arif never boasted about what he had done, but the community around him never forgot. His story was shared in classrooms, printed in newspapers, and whispered at chai stalls. People began calling him Midi Ka Sapati, the soldier of soil, because he had protected life, not with weapons or power, but with simple courage. The impact of his actions continued to grow in unexpected ways. A small medical organization, inspired by Arif's story, started a mobile health clinic project for remote villages. They asked for his input. Arif, who once had to walk miles to buy medicine, now helped guide where clinics were needed most. His humble words helped design a system that brought care to the forgotten. One of the doctors running the initiative was none other than Sanaa's husband's old colleague, who had heard of the accident and been moved by Arif's bravery. That man helped secure support from larger hospitals. Arif found himself sitting at tables with doctors, planners, and officials, people he never thought he'd speak to, offering his insights in the simplest way possible, yet they listened closely. They treated him with respect not because of his clothes or his education, but because of what he had done when no one else was around. Back in his village, the changes were subtle but meaningful. A new well was dug near the school. The road leading to Arif's farm was finally paved. More importantly, the villagers had begun to believe again, not just in development, but in each other. They started organizing cleanup drives, supporting children's education, and creating emergency groups for floods and accidents. The night Arif pulled 3 lives from that overturned car had somehow awakened something larger than anyone expected. Even the local police and administrative officers started making regular visits to rural areas to check on conditions and meet the villagers. The gap between city and village had not disappeared, but it had certainly narrowed. And at the heart of all of this was Arif, who never sought attention, but had quietly become a symbol of what one person's courage could do. The children he rescued, Sarah and Bilal, often visited him with their mother. They would bring small gifts, flowers, sweets, or drawings, and spend hours playing near his field. They called him Uncle Arif and listened to his stories as if he were their own grandfather. Sanaa never forgot what he had done. Her gratitude turned into friendship, and over time, that friendship grew into something even deeper, rooted not in need, but in mutual respect. Her visits became more frequent, sometimes just to talk over tea, sometimes to help his wife with cooking or chores. There were whispers in the village, as there always are, but Arif and Sanaa handled it with grace. They had both seen life at its worst. They had both fought silently for their children's futures. Their connection was never loud, never dramatic, but deeply human. 2 people brought together by fate and bonded by something unspoken. Then came the day when Arif received a letter unlike any he had ever held. It came from the national government, an invitation to a prestigious awards ceremony in the capital city, recognizing citizens who had performed extraordinary acts of bravery and service. Arif was confused at first. He had already received more attention than he ever wanted. But his children, his wife, and even the villagers encouraged him to go. "This is not just for you," they said. "This is for all of us." When he stood on that stage, dressed in clean but modest clothes, facing cameras and dignitaries, his heart pounded not from nerves but from disbelief. He accepted the award with a quiet smile, speaking only a few words. "I am just a farmer," he said. That night, "I didn't save lives for reward or recognition. I did it because I couldn't walk away. We are all responsible for each other. That's what makes us human." The applause was thunderous. Back in his village, people celebrated with fireworks and sweets. His children hugged him tightly when he returned, and even old men who once scoffed at him now nodded in respect. The honor didn't make Arif proud, it made him humble. He knew the world was full of people who did good without ever being seen. He happened to be one who got noticed, and he felt it was now his duty to live up to that. He began spending time helping others, fixing tools, teaching farming tricks to young boys, helping widows and elderly people who had no support. His story became a chapter in local school books, a message that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears muddy slippers and carries a broken umbrella through the rain. Years later, long after the flipped car had rusted away and the road had been repaired, Arif's story remained alive. Not just in books or news clippings, but in hearts. His own grandchildren grew up hearing how their grandfather once saved lives on a rainy night, not because he was strong or rich, but because he had a kind heart and a steady will. That lesson became their compass. The world didn't change overnight. Poverty didn't vanish, and not every child had the chance they deserved. But where Arif lived, people had learned something precious, that even one person, even someone with calloused hands and worn-out clothes, can make a difference so great it echoes beyond their lifetime. And so, in that quiet village, on that same road where tragedy had once struck, people still remember. They remember the sound of thunder in the sky, the scream of metal, the flash of headlights, and the quiet figure who ran into the darkness without knowing what he would find. They remember the poor farmer who saved a mother and her children, and in doing so, saved something much greater: faith in humanity.